We've decided you'll move to Tucson next month. My daughter-in-law, Milaline, said it like she was announcing the weather. Not asking. Deciding. The three of us sat in my living room. My son Dexon, his wife Milaline, and me. My hands found the armrest of my chair. I steadied myself. "I'm sorry, what?" I heard myself ask. Dexon wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the coffee table like the answer lived there. Milaline smiled that smile she'd perfected over the past 8 years. The one that said she was doing me a favor. The one that made my stomach turn. "Your sister Laralee found you a lovely assisted living community there," Milaline continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Very affordable. Very nice for someone your age." Someone my age. I was 62. Not ancient, not helpless, not someone to be disposed of like old furniture. I'd raised Dexon alone after his father left. 23 years of double shifts at the hospital where I worked as a nurse. 23 years of choosing between new shoes for him and new tires for my car. 23 years of showing up. And now, my son, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, was sitting 3 feet away from me, unable to make eye contact while his wife orchestrated my abandonment. "This isn't a discussion," Milaline said, standing up. She smoothed her designer jeans and looked at me with that expression that had become her trademark. Pity mixed with contempt. "We've already put down the deposit. The place is expecting you on the 15th. The 15th, 14 days away. They'd made this decision without me, planned it, executed it, and now they were simply announcing my exile. I looked at Dexon, really looked at him, waiting for him to say something, anything, to defend me, to say this was wrong. His jaw clenched, his fingers drummed against his thigh. He was nervous, guilty, but not guilty enough to stop it. "Why?" I asked. The word came out smaller than I intended. "Because you need care," Milaline said. "And we can't provide it, not with our schedule." That was the lie. The beautiful, convenient lie that would let them sleep at night. They didn't need me anymore. I'd become an inconvenience, an obligation, a drain on their resources and their time. And now, they were solving the problem by removing me from the equation entirely. I stood up. My legs felt unsteady, but I forced myself to stand anyway. "I need to think about this," I said. "There's nothing to think about," Milaline replied. "It's already done." She walked toward the kitchen. Dexon followed her like a puppet. I stood alone in my living room, in the house I'd bought with my own money, on the land I'd owned for 30 years, and I realized something that made my blood go cold. They hadn't come here to convince me. They'd come here to inform me. The decision had been made long before this conversation. They'd been planning this. All of them. I moved to the kitchen doorway. Milaline was pouring water into a glass with the casual confidence of someone who owned the place. She didn't, but she acted like she did. She always did. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked. Dexon exchanged a look with his wife. That look, the one that meant they'd rehearsed this conversation, prepared for my questions, already decided how to handle my objections. "A few months," Dexon said quietly. "We wanted to make sure everything was perfect before we told you." A few months. They'd been lying to me for months, smiling at family dinners, calling me to ask how my day was, all while they arranged my removal from their lives. The betrayal was so complete, so thorough, that I couldn't quite comprehend it. "And Laralee?" I asked. "My sister?" "She thinks it's the right decision," Milaline said. "For everyone." For everyone, as if my exile was somehow beneficial to me. as if being shipped off to a strange state, away from my home, away from my life, away from everything I'd built, was somehow in my best interest. I realized then that I was standing in my own kitchen, the kitchen where I'd taught Dexon to cook when he was 7 years old, where we'd baked birthday cakes together, where we'd sat at the table and talked about his dreams, and I was being treated like an intruder, like someone who didn't belong. "I won't go," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, defiant, foreign. Millaline set down the water glass. It clinked against the granite countertop with a finality that made me flinch. "You don't have a choice," she said. Those words, those 5 words, changed everything. The next morning, I called Lorraine. My sister picked up on the 3rd ring, and I could hear the guilt in her voice before she even said hello. "Anaël," she said, "I was going to call you." "Were you?" I asked. "Or were you just going to let Dexon and Millaline make all the decisions?" "It's not like that," Laralee said, but it was exactly like that. I could hear it in her voice, the careful construction of an excuse, the framework of a justification that didn't justify anything. "I'm not going," I said. "I'm not moving to Tucson. I'm not leaving my home." "Anaël, you're alone there. You're working too hard. You need to think about your health, your future." "My future?" I interrupted. "My future is being decided by people who don't even know me anymore. People who are too busy with their lives to bother with their mother." "That's not fair," Laralee said. But her voice wavered. She knew it was fair. She knew exactly what they were doing. "When did you become part of this?" I asked. "When did my own sister decide to help my son abandon me?" There was a long silence. I could hear Lorraine breathing on the other end of the line, thinking, calculating, deciding whether to tell me the truth or continue the lie. "Millaline called me 6 months ago," Laralee finally said. "She said they needed help. That you were becoming a burden. That you needed more care than they could provide." 6 months. They'd been planning this for 6 months. Longer than I'd realized. This wasn't a sudden decision born of circumstance. This was a calculated, premeditated plan to remove me from their lives. "I'm your sister," I said. "You were supposed to protect me, not help them get rid of me." "We're not getting rid of you," Laralee said. "We're helping you transition to a place where you can get proper care." "I don't need care," I said. "I'm healthy. I'm independent. I'm still working. I'm still living my life." "For now," Laralee said. And those 2 words told me everything. They weren't planning for my current needs. They were planning for their future convenience. They were deciding where I would go when I became too old, too sick, too much of a burden for them to manage. They were deciding my fate without me. I hung up the phone. My fingers were rigid around the receiver. I set it down carefully, as if it might break, as if anything else could break. Everything had already shattered. I spent the next 3 days gathering information. I called the assisted living facility in Tucson, pretended to be interested, asked questions about their policies, their staff, their costs. The woman who answered the phone was cheerful and professional. She told me about the activities they offered, the community events, the medical staff on site. It sounded like a prison designed to look like a resort. I asked about visiting hours. She laughed, actually laughed, and said there were no restrictions. People could visit any time. As if that was a selling point. As if the fact that I'd have visitors meant I wouldn't be alone. As if having the option for people to visit made it better that I'd been sent away. I looked at the deposit receipt Dexon had left on the kitchen counter. $15,000. Non-refundable. They'd already paid for my imprisonment. That's when I decided to fight back. I called my lawyer, Pateo Perez, the next morning. I'd used him for the paperwork when I bought my house. He was sharp, thorough, and most importantly, he understood the law. "They can't force you to move," Pateo said when I explained the situation. "You're a competent adult. Your home is in your name. You have legal rights." "But they're trying to make me leave," I said. "Let them try," Pateo replied. "You have options." He explained my rights to me. I could refuse to go. I could take out a restraining order if they tried to force me. I could document their harassment. I could fight them in court if necessary. The law was on my side. The law said that I, Anel MacDonald, had the right to stay in my own home. But the law couldn't protect me from the emotional devastation of knowing that my own son wanted me gone. I hung up with Pateo and sat in my living room. The afternoon light came through the windows, illuminating the dust on the shelves. Shelves that held photographs of Dexon growing up. Dexon at his high school graduation. Dexon's wedding. Dexon holding his daughter when she was born. All those moments that I'd been there for. All those moments that meant nothing now. I picked up the phone and called my son. "We need to talk," I said when he answered. "There's nothing to talk about," Dexon replied. "The decision is made." "The decision is made by you and Milaline," I said. "Not by me. Not about me." "Mom, don't mom me," I interrupted. "Don't use that tone like I'm being unreasonable, like I'm the problem here. I raised you. I gave up everything for you, and this is how you repay me? You think I want this?" Dexon's voice rose. "You think I'm happy about this?" "I don't know what you are anymore," I said. "I don't know my son." There was a long silence. I could hear the weight of his guilt through the phone line. "Milaline says," he started. "I don't care what Milaline says," I interrupted. "I care what you say. I care what my son thinks. Do you want me gone?" Another silence. Longer this time. And in that silence, I heard the answer. "Yes," he finally said. "Yes, I do." The word hit me like a physical blow. I had to sit down, had to find the nearest chair and lower myself into it before my legs gave out. "You want me gone?" I repeated, unable to believe I'd heard correctly. "I want my life back," Dexon said. "I want to not worry about you. I want to not feel guilty every time I can't visit. I want to not think about what happens when you get sick or when you can't take care of yourself anymore. I want all of that to not be my problem. I'm your mother," I said. "I know," Dexon replied. "And I'm sorry. But I can't do this anymore. I can't be responsible for you. I can't carry that weight." "So, you're just going to abandon me?" "We're not abandoning you. We're putting you in a place where you'll be taken care of." "By strangers," I said. "In a strange state. Away from everything I know." "Yes," Dexon said, and there was no apology in his voice, no regret, just resignation, like he'd already made peace with what he was doing. I hung up the phone. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say I loved him. I just ended the call and sat in the silence of my empty house. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about all the times I'd chosen Dexon over myself. All the sacrifices I'd made, all the moments I'd put his needs before my own. And I realized that none of it had mattered. In the end, he'd still chosen to discard me. I got out of bed and went to my office. I opened my filing cabinets and started pulling out documents, bank statements, investment accounts, property deeds. I had money, not a fortune, but enough. I'd been careful with my finances. I'd saved for retirement, I'd made smart choices, and I'd been planning to leave it all to Dexon. I called Pateo again the next morning. "I need to change my will," I said. "Okay," Pateo said. "What changes do you want to make?" "Everything," I said. "I want to leave everything to my sister Lorelei, except for a small amount to Dexon. Enough to show that I didn't forget him, but not enough to matter." "Are you sure?" Pateo asked. "That's a significant change." "I'm sure," I said. The paperwork took 3 days. I went into Pateo's office and signed the new will. I made it official. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd saved, would go to Lorelei. Not because I loved her more, but because she'd betrayed me less. It wasn't much of a victory, but it was something. The 15th arrived. Dexon and Millaline showed up at my house in the morning with a moving truck. They'd hired movers. They were planning to pack up my belongings and load them into the truck and drive me to Tucson whether I wanted to go or not. I was waiting for them on my front porch. "I'm not going," I said before they could say anything. Millaline's face went red. "We have the deposit." "I don't care about your deposit," I said. "This is my house. I own it. I'm not leaving." "Your lawyer called us," Dexon said. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. "He said you were considering legal action." "I'm not considering," I said. "I'm doing it. I'm filing for harassment. I'm filing for elder abuse. I'm documenting every conversation we've had where you've tried to force me out of my home." "Mom," Dexon started. "Don't," I said. "Don't call me that. You made your choice. I've made mine." I went back inside and locked the door. I watched through the window as Dexon and Millaline argued in the driveway. Watched as they gestured at the moving truck. Watched as Dexon pulled out his phone and called someone. Watched as they eventually got back in their car and drove away. The moving truck left an hour later. I stood in my house and felt the weight of what I'd done. I'd cut my son out of my life. I'd changed my will. I'd chosen legal action over reconciliation. And I didn't regret a single bit of it. But I also didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, empty, like I'd won a battle but lost the war. That evening, Lorelei called. "Dexon told me what happened," she said. "Good," I replied. "I hope he told you exactly what he tried to do." "He did," Lorelei said. "And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Annelle. I should have stood up for you from the beginning." "Yes," I said. "You should have." "Can I come over?" Lorelei asked. "No," I said. "I need time." I hung up and sat in the darkness of my living room. The house felt different now, colder, like it had been invaded and violated, like the sanctuary I'd built had been compromised. I called my work the next morning and requested a leave of absence. I told them I needed to deal with some personal matters. They approved it immediately. They always did. I was a good employee, reliable, professional, the kind of person people could depend on. But not my family. My family couldn't depend on me. Or rather, they didn't want to. I spent the next week documenting everything. I wrote down every conversation I'd had with Dexon and Millaline. Every attempt to force me to move, every lie they'd told, every betrayal. I compiled it all into a file and gave it to Pateo. He reviewed it and told me I had a strong case if I wanted to pursue it. "Do you?" he asked. I didn't answer immediately. I sat in his office and thought about what it would mean to take my son to court, to make this public, to force him to defend his actions in front of a judge. "Not yet," I finally said, "but I want to be ready." Pateo nodded. He understood. The threat was sometimes more powerful than the action. The following Monday, I returned to work. My colleagues asked me how I was doing. I told them I was fine. I smiled and acted normal and pretended that my world hadn't just fallen apart. That's what we do, isn't it? We pretend. We smile. We tell people we're fine when we're not. But something had changed inside me. Something fundamental. I'd always been the caretaker. The one who took care of everyone else. The one who put everyone else's needs before her own. And I'd done it gladly. I'd done it because I thought it meant something. I thought it meant they loved me. I thought it meant they'd take care of me when I got old. I was wrong. I realized that the abandonment I'd feared wasn't something that would happen in the future. It was happening now. It had been happening for years, probably. I just hadn't wanted to see it. Milaline had been trying to isolate me from Dexon for years, making comments about how much time he spent with me, suggesting that I was too dependent on him, planting seeds of resentment. And Dexon, weak as he was, had let her. He'd listened to her poison and had slowly, imperceptibly, begun to distance himself from me. The abandonment wasn't a sudden decision. It was a slow, methodical process of erasure. And I'd been so busy working, so busy being the strong one, that I hadn't noticed until it was almost too late. 2 weeks after I refused to move, I received a letter from a lawyer. Not Peteo, a different lawyer, representing Dexon and Milaline. They were claiming that I was mentally incompetent, that I was incapable of making rational decisions, that I needed to be declared incompetent so they could take control of my finances and my property. In other words, they were trying to have me declared mentally unfit so they could force me to move anyway. I read the letter 3 times. Each time, my hands felt colder. Each time, the reality of what they were trying to do became clearer. They weren't just trying to abandon me. They were trying to erase me, to make me legally disappear, to take control of everything I'd worked for. I called Peteo immediately. "They're trying to have me declared incompetent," I said. "I know," Peteo replied. He'd already received a copy of the letter. "But they don't have grounds. You're clearly competent. You're employed. You're managing your finances. You're making rational decisions." "So what do I do?" I asked. "We go to court," Peteo said, "and we fight." The court date was set for 3 weeks later. 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks to gather evidence of my competence. 3 weeks to prepare for the fight of my life. I hired a private investigator. I wanted to know everything about Milaline, where she came from, what her history was. If there were other people she'd done this to, if I was just one victim in a long line of victims. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Milaline had been married before. Twice, actually. Both marriages had ended in similar ways. The husbands had become problems. There had been attempts to have them declared incompetent. There had been financial disputes. There had been restraining orders. And in both cases, Milaline had walked away with significant assets. She was a predator. A calculated, methodical predator who targeted vulnerable men and then systematically stripped them of their autonomy and their resources. And she'd set her sights on Dexon, and through Dexon, on me. I gave this information to Peteo. He reviewed it and added it to our case file. It didn't directly prove that Milaline was trying to have me declared incompetent for nefarious reasons, but it certainly painted a picture. The night before the court hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and thought about everything that had led to this moment. All the choices I'd made, all the sacrifices I'd made, all the ways I'd put my son first. And I realized that I'd been so focused on being a good mother that I'd forgotten to teach my son to be a good man. I'd taught him to be dependent on me. I'd taught him that I would always be there to solve his problems, I taught him that he didn't have to take responsibility for his own actions. And then I'd been shocked when he grew up to be a man who would abandon his mother at the first sign of inconvenience. The fault wasn't entirely his. It was mine, too. The court hearing was held on a Tuesday morning in March. I wore a navy suit and minimal makeup. I looked competent, professional, sane, everything a judge would want to see in someone defending against an incompetency claim. Dexon and Millaline were there with their lawyer. Millaline looked confident. She'd done this before. She knew how to play the game. The judge, a woman named Caruana Moore, reviewed the case file. She read through Pateo's documentation. She reviewed the evidence of my competence. She looked at the financial records showing that I'd been managing my own money successfully for decades. And then she listened to Dexon's lawyer argue that I was mentally incompetent. The arguments were weak. They claimed that my refusal to move to Tucson was evidence of irrational thinking. They claimed that my legal action against my son was evidence of paranoia. They claimed that my changed will was evidence of spite and mental deterioration. It was all nonsense, and the judge knew it. When it was Pateo's turn, he presented the evidence. He showed the judge the documentation of my competence. He showed her my employment history. He showed her my financial management. He showed her the communications between Dexon and Millaline that proved they'd been planning this for months. And then he presented the information about Millaline's previous marriages. The judge's expression changed. She leaned forward. She asked questions. She wanted to know more. By the end of the hearing, it was clear which way the judge was leaning. The petition to declare Ms. McDonald incompetent is denied, Judge Caruana Moore said. The evidence does not support such a claim. Ms. McDonald is clearly a competent, intelligent woman who is capable of managing her own affairs. She paused. She looked directly at Dexon and Millaline. Furthermore, she continued, I'm concerned about the pattern of behavior described in this case. The attempt to force a competent adult out of her home. The attempt to have her declared incompetent. The financial motivations behind these actions. I'm recommending that Ms. McDonald pursue additional legal action if she feels her rights have been violated. It was a victory, a complete and total victory. I felt Pateo's hand on my shoulder. I turned to look at him and saw him smiling. I wanted to smile too, but I couldn't. I felt numb, empty, like I'd won something important but lost something even more important in the process. Dexon and Millaline left the courtroom without saying anything. They didn't look at me. They didn't acknowledge me. They just walked out. And I realized that I'd won the battle. But I'd lost my son. In the weeks that followed, I filed a civil suit against Dexon and Millaline. I sued them for emotional distress, for harassment, for elder abuse. Pateo handled everything. I just had to show up and answer questions. The case dragged on for months. There were depositions, there were discovery requests, there were settlement offers that I refused. I didn't want money. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted them to admit what they'd done. I wanted them to understand the harm they'd caused. But Dexon and Millaline never admitted anything. They just kept denying. They kept lying. They kept insisting that they'd been trying to help me. Eventually, they settled. They paid a settlement that my lawyer said was generous. I donated it to a senior care advocacy group. I didn't want their money. I didn't want anything from them. What I wanted was impossible to get. What I wanted was my son back. What I wanted was to go back in time and undo all the choices that had led to this moment. But time doesn't work that way. You can't undo the past. You can only move forward. 6 months after the court hearing, I returned to work full-time. I'd taken a leave of absence, but I was ready to go back. Ready to throw myself into my work. ready to focus on something other than my son's betrayal. My colleagues welcomed me back. They asked how I was doing. I told them I was fine. And I was. Not happy exactly, but functional. I was learning how to live with the knowledge that my son didn't love me, that he'd never loved me the way I'd loved him. I was learning how to be alone. Lara Lee called me several times. She wanted to reconcile. She wanted to fix things. She wanted me to forgive her for her part in the betrayal. I told her I needed time, and I did. I needed time to process everything that had happened. Time to understand how people I loved could hurt me so deeply. A year after the abandonment attempt, Dexon called. It was the first time I'd heard his voice in months. "Hi, Mom," he said. "It's me." I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence sit between us. Let him feel the weight of what he'd done. "I wanted to talk to you," he continued, "about what happened, about what I did." "Okay," I said. "I'm listening." "I was wrong," Dexon said. "I know that now. I was selfish. I was weak. I let Millaline manipulate me. I let her convince me that you were a burden." "And I'm sorry." The apology was too little, too late, but I listened anyway. "I've been in therapy," he continued. "I've been trying to understand why I did what I did, why I was so willing to abandon you, and I realized that I was angry at you. For years, I was angry at you." "For what?" I asked. "For everything," Dexon said. "For raising me alone, for making me feel like I owed you something, for making me feel guilty every time I wanted to live my own life, for making me feel like I had to take care of you. And I took that anger out on you by trying to get rid of you. I listened to my son confess his sins. I listened to him try to justify his actions by blaming me, and I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. Understanding that Dexon was broken in ways I'd never realized. Understanding that the abandonment he'd tried to perpetrate on me was a reflection of his own abandonment issues. "I need to know something," I said. "Do you love me?" There was a long silence, and in that silence, I heard the answer. "I don't know," Dexon finally said. "I want to, but I don't know if I do." "Then I don't think we should stay in contact," I said. "Not right now. Maybe someday, but not now." I hung up the phone, and I felt free. It took me another year to fully process everything that had happened. A year of therapy of my own. A year of learning to trust myself again. A year of rebuilding my sense of self. I cut contact with Dexon completely. I didn't answer his calls. I didn't respond to his emails. I didn't acknowledge his attempts at reconciliation. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the most necessary. I became closer to Lorraine. We talked about what had happened. We talked about why she'd gotten involved. We talked about how to move forward. It took time, but eventually, I forgave her. She'd made a mistake, but she'd also learned from it. I also started dating again. Not seriously, but casually. I went out with men my age. I had conversations. I remembered what it felt like to be wanted, to be valued, to be seen. 2 years after the abandonment attempt, I received a letter from Dexon. He'd written me a long letter explaining everything. Explaining his feelings, explaining his actions, explaining why he'd tried to have me declared incompetent. I read it once. And then I put it in a drawer and never read it again. I didn't need his explanations. I didn't need his justifications. I needed to move on with my life. I retired from nursing at 65. I'd worked for over 40 years. I'd given everything to my job and to my family. Now it was time to give something to myself. I traveled. I took classes. I volunteered. I built a life that didn't revolve around anyone else's needs. I built a life that was entirely my own. And I was happy. Not in the way I'd been happy before, when my happiness was dependent on my son's happiness, but in a deeper, more authentic way. A way that couldn't be taken away by anyone else's choices. I learned that love doesn't obligate you to accept abandonment, that family doesn't give you the right to hurt each other, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. I learned that I was stronger than I'd ever realized, that I could survive betrayal, that I could rebuild my life, that I could be alone and be okay. And I learned that the abandonment my family had tried to perpetrate on me had actually set me free. Today, I'm 70 years old. I live in the same house I've lived in for 30 years. I have friends. I have hobbies. I have a life that's entirely my own. Dexon has tried to contact me several times over the years. Each time, I've ignored him. He's not part of my life anymore. He chose not to be. Lorelei and I are close again. We have lunch together every week. We talk about everything, and we've learned to be honest with each other in ways we never were before. I've never moved to Tucson. I never will. This is my home. This is my life. And no one will ever take it away from me again. If you're facing a similar situation with your family, know that you have options. Know that you have rights. Know that you don't have to accept abandonment, no matter who it comes from. Stand up for yourself. Fight for your life. Because in the end, the only person who can truly protect you is you.